How my gang stalking began. My story. How it started. Mobbing often starts with a conflict. My mobbing gang stalking was no exception. In 2002, I got a new neighbor, a fireman, who moved to Newburgh, New York from the city. When I went into the woods in the back of my house, I saw he was dumping leaves on my property. I went over upon seeing him in his yard and asked him to please stop throwing leaves in the woods behind my house. He said nothing. Not long after, I looked back into the woods and at the back of my house, and I saw more leaves. I had seen a snake on my property previously, and I worried the pile of leaves could be an inviting new home for snakes. I put up a sign on the pile of leaves, no dumping. The fireman drove over my sign one day with his lawnmower, and I could hear him yelling loudly when he did and cursing me out. From then on, things kept getting worse. Throughout the summer, I got phone calls. When I answered, no one was there. One day, as I was doing dishes, I saw him there, just staring at my property. My yard was bigger than all my neighbors. I owned a little patch of wood in the back of a very big lawn. He caught me looking at him, and he just stared at me. It felt like he was trying to intimidate me. A couple of days later, I found a chicken bone in my completely fenced-in yard that my dog, who plays in the yard, could have choked on. Occasionally, there would be things in the yard that my dog could choke on, like a very small ball or a big metal washer. In the spring of 2003, I felt he did something that threatened my safety and my brother's. I called the police. After that, a call was made to social services saying that I was paranoid. Among the complaints against me were that I called the police on my neighbors. I had only called the police on him. I dressed inappropriately for the weather, the complaint said. I put a for sale sign up and then took it down on my home. Sounded to me, rather than paranoia, this was a complaint by someone who wanted me to move. Later in the summer of 2003, as I was walking with my brother who had a profound mental handicap in my neighborhood, I saw him again in a truck. He stopped the truck in the middle of the road and just stared at us. Again, I felt he was trying to intimidate me. My impression of him was that he was a big bully who picked on people he perceived as weak to give him a sense of power. A section of short fence in the front of my house was stolen from the front of my property. A week later, I found it dumped in the road in the front of my house, close to where it was stolen. My car, which I parked on the street, was scratched about 15 times with little greenish marks near where the gas tank was. On June 2nd, a message was left on my answering machine. The only thing I could clearly hear was the word paranoid. There was noise for hours at a time. The noise from hammering, drilling, and power equipment got so loud that I stopped sleeping in my bedroom and started sleeping on the couch. One morning, when I had been woken up by the noise, I heard someone shout, "Call 911. On October 4th, a hamburger-like substance was found in my completely fenced-in backyard. My dog started to eat it. I gave him a teaspoon of peroxide to throw it up, since I didn't know what it was on my vet's advice. When my surrounding neighbors went to work, the hammering would begin, and I began to find things. A dead squirrel squashed against my front fence, dead birds in front of my garage, a mouse by my garbage can, a skunk at the end of the stairs of my back deck with its head cut off. Furniture was dumped in my backwoods. I found a slit in my garbage can. The handle of my mailbox was off. Trash was regularly found on my property: pails, buckets, flower pots, and dead Christmas trees. And the beeping of horns started. They happened frequently when I came home from someplace when I went outside, and at other times. Before this, I couldn't remember there ever beeping in my neighborhood, which rarely had any traffic. It happened when I sat down for dinner. It came from the direction of several of my neighbors' homes. I would take the babysitter to the door, and when I got outside, I would hear a beep from a neighbor's house. One day, a neighbor just went to his car and beeped his horn about 5 times continuously. When one of my beeping neighbors came to the door to talk to me after all the beeping, I said to her, "Do you think I should still be talking to you?" Her response was, "Oh," and with that, she turned around and walked out. When I would leave or enter the house, I noticed one of my neighbors would be wearing red, or sometimes a red car would be passing the house. One day, I saw one of the neighbors who had been wearing red had their lawnmowers on their lawn. When I drove to the next block, leaving my development, there was a lawnmower on the lawn. When I took my brother, a mentally handicapped person, for his walk at the duck pond in Cornwall, across the street, there was a lawnmower at the foot of the garage. I saw that with other neighbors, too. Sometimes the neighbors who had been wearing red would have their garage door open and a lawnmower at the tip of it. Then whenever I was about to leave my development and get on North Plank Road, a fire engine or a fire chief's SUV would pass in front of me. The fire chief's SUV were from all surrounding districts. They would pass in front of me as I was about to get on North Plank Road, or once on the road, they would be in the back or in the front of me. Even when I went into other communities, they would be there, in front or behind me on the road. I'd take my brother for a walk, where we often walked at a park in Wappingers Falls, and a fire chief's SUV would be parked at the edge of the park. I'd take my brother to walk at the landing in Cornwall, and there would be a fire chief's SUV parked at the end of the landing. And fire engines started passing by as we walked at the Cornwall landing, and white ambulances, both private and public, seemed to be everywhere we went. The fire engines and ambulance would pass in front of us as we stopped at intersections for a light, and there would be siren sounds when I went to take my mail out of the mailbox, when we walked in a park, when we were walking in front of a store. Once I went into Petco, and an ambulance followed me in, and someone in red stepped out of it. And there were firemen. I would go into Subway, and a man with a shirt indicating he was a fireman would follow me in. I would walk at the Newburgh Mall, and men with fireman insignias on jackets would walk close to us. When I got to the end of the mall near Bonton's, an alarm would go off, and all the people would exit Bonton's. Alarms went off in other places, too. When I went to shop in Price Chopper, I would go to shop in the Poughkeepsie Galleria, and security guards seemed to be wherever I went. Then the police started in. They would pass in front of me as I tried to get on North Plank Road from my development. They, along with fire trucks and ambulances, would be there on my entries and exits, passing by when I was out in the community. Several times I went to the police. The lieutenant of the town police even came to my house as I told him the story of what was happening. He left me his card. Sometimes the police did dangerous things on the road. A state trooper came out from the side of the road suddenly in front of my car. 2 town police cars came at me from 2 different directions on the road, and I had to slam on my brakes. I called the lieutenant and told him I thought that they endangered my brother and my safety. He told me I was crazy. And then there were the dogs. I would take my brother for a walk in the park in Wappingers Fall, and a dog would run out in our direction from the house across the street. I would go to Home Depot, and as I went toward the store, a big dog would jump out of a car window. I would come out of J.C. Penney's, and a man with a dog would be standing by my car. I would take my brother for a walk on the long drive into Algonquin Park, and at the end of it would be a car with an open window, with a dog near the open window, barking in the car. I would take my brother for a walk at Newburgh's waterfront, and a man with a shirt with a fireman's insignia would let his waist-high dog walk in front of me without a leash. I would go to the Newburgh Mall, and a man with a waist-high dog would be walking toward me. A car would pull up. He would go to talk to the man in the car and drop the dog's leash. I went to the state trooper's barracks to talk to him about what was going on. He asked me if I was on medication. Then as I left the state trooper's barracks and was back on 9W, a state trooper's car came up behind me, putting on his siren late as he passed me and entered an intersection, nearly causing an accident. When graffiti was put on my house, I went to the state police. The officer who interviewed my neighbors after I gave him a description of my relationship with my neighbors and what was happening there, told me he thought the graffiti was the result of a hate crime. When I went to the station to talk to him again, he took me outside and told me his superior was not going to do anything about it because the town police, whom I reported it to also, weren't going to do anything about it. He told me to go to his major. I wrote the major a letter, but got no response. When I went to the state trooper's barracks to talk to the officer again, I was told he had been transferred. I joined a bullying support group online run by the Nineveh Project and found out that what was happening to me in my neighborhood and community was not unique. That's where I was introduced to the word mobbing. Many people in this online support group were targets of workplace mobbing. As I listened to their stories in this email discussion group, I decided to write a story on mobbing for my local paper to inform the public of this phenomena. I talked about the idea via email with the editor of the Sunday edition of my local paper. She told me to go ahead with the project. I interviewed the moderator of the online support group, and I exchanged emails with Gail Purcell Elliott, who co-authored the book Mobbing, Emotional Abuse in the American Workplace, and with Peter Randall, author of Adult Bullying Perpetuators and Victims, with Dr. Pamela Lutkin-Sandvik, who had done research on mobbing, with Gary R. Playford, who had written Bullying and the Brain, and with Dr. Henry L. Thompson to get insights about the relationship of personality type, a topic I was greatly interested in, and bullying or mobbing. It was from Dr. Lutkin-Sandvik that I got the most insights. From her, I got a way to talk about mobbing. She had defined it in detail, not as an isolated incident, but as multiple negative acts that go on at least weekly or more frequently. She talked about the isolation, intimidation, and humiliation that is at the heart of it. She explained about how to be classified as mobbing. The target had to be unable to stop it. From her, I learned that mobbing was different from ordinary behavior because of its repetition and duration. A neighbor can come out of a house wearing red when you come out of yours, but if it happens repeatedly with multiple neighbors and goes on over a period of days or weeks or months or years, you might be mobbed. I began to see I could explain to other people what was going on. Yes, mobbing took place in the context of ordinary events, but it could be distinguished from ordinary behavior by its repetition and duration. And you could see the repetition in pictures. I began taking pictures. Taking pictures, videos of the mobbing seemed to make parts of it, especially in my neighborhood, diminish to a degree. I had been in touch with the Orange County District Attorney before. When I called the DA to find out what I could do about my mobbing, organized gang stalking, I was told by an investigator, police, unions, and corporations did gang stalking. When I began to send the pictures I was taking to the district attorney, his response was to send mobile mental health to my house. By taking pictures, the person from mobile mental health explained, I was endangering myself. Endangering myself could be a cause for institutionalization. I went to a lawyer. What they are doing, he told me, is another form of harassment. Do you have $15,000, he asked me. That's how much we would need for a private investigator. I didn't have $15,000. So I started to write to everyone I could think of. The governor, the legislature, the state branch of the ACLU. I wrote to everyone, even pastors, to tell them what was going on in their community. Nothing helped. One aide in a legislature's office asked me if I had legislation he could sponsor. I didn't. I was alone in fighting this. Let me take a drink. Moving to California. I had always wanted to move to California, and I asked myself, could it be going on there too? I decided I was going to move. The challenge was how to get my profoundly mentally handicapped brother to California without getting thrown off the plane because of his behavior. I decided to go by car, and I paid a distant cousin to drive us there. That's when I learned this wasn't confined to New York. I would come out of my motel room in Oklahoma, and there in the parking lot, empty of people, would be a person in red coming down the stairs. I would come out of the general store in Texas, and a red truck would pass in front of me. The patterns I saw in New York, I was seeing again, but not everywhere, not in the Plain States. I would later read on the ACLU's website that surveillance by police was going on in over 30 states. They also said methods were being used our forefathers had never dreamed of. I wondered if there were some governors who kept this out of their state. Later, I would read online about gang stalking by firemen going on in Florida. I would read online of news stories of a financial advisor passing out leaflets in New Jersey to inform the community about his gang stalking, and I would exchange emails with him. I saw a YouTube video about a couple in Ohio who was interviewed by the news and was being gang stalked after having a dispute with a fire chief over buying a house. When I was in California, I got an offer from a lawyer in Missouri to pay me for telling her how I coped with gang stalking to help a client of hers who was being gang stalked. So it wasn't long before I understood this was a national phenomenon. My gang stalking in California began almost immediately. I stayed at first in a motel by the ocean. I would go to the laundry room and a person in red would come out of their unit. I moved from there into a place I rented with the intention of buying with a very strong neighborhood watch group. I would rarely see anyone passing by my unit, but when I would come out of my unit, a neighbor would pass by. In gang stalking, this tactic is called same-time exit entry. This was the pattern that took place in my neighborhood in New York. There was gang stalking at intersections with red trucks and cars. I would take a walk, and the only other person walking would be a person in red. I decided to buy a nearby new mobile home. I would go to the dump. I would go to dump my garbage in the dumpster, and someone in red would come in next. As I exited the mobile home park where I lived, a person in red would be standing outside their house or in a red car would be coming toward me in the opposite lane. I sold the mobile home and moved to where I live now. This was written many years ago, by the way. In every neighborhood I have lived in since that conflict with the fireman neighbor in New York, I have been gang stalked by my neighbors. In the 9 years, it was 9 years when I wrote that, it's 12 now, actually 13, that my government gang stalking has gone on, I have never been able to have a neighbor friend. I believe they get surrounding neighbors to gang stalk. Their targets entries and exits to isolate them. One experience I've had repeatedly is I hire a handyman or a blue-collar service worker, and next I see them on the street as I exit my development wearing red or the color of the gang stalkers are wearing. It's as if they want to cut gang stalking targets off from any help to isolate them as completely as possible. Trying to expose government gang stalking in California. What do? You're in a state where you don't know anyone and you are being gang stalked 24/7 by police, by firemen, by security guards, by your neighbors, by people wearing or carrying red and driving red cars and trucks, I tried to inform people of what was going on. My routine was to get up in the morning, clean the house, iron, and after breakfast or lunch, take my brother out walking in the community for exercise. Every day we would walk in a different neighborhood. In California, I'm gang stalked in every neighborhood I walk in. From the very beginning, I decided this could not be tolerated. In New York, when my neighbors were gang stalking me, I put signs in my windows to inform the community what was going on. When I came to California, I would walk through the streets carrying a sign explaining I was being gang stalked. I put a car topper on my car explaining gang stalking to the public. I put magnetic signs on my car describing it too. I passed out leaflets and I continued to write to every public official I could think of about what was going on. Another drink. Early on, where this all started in Newburgh, New York, when I was experiencing acts of vandalism, I learned a camera could help, especially when no one believes you. Taking pictures, videos can provide proof of what is going on. But for me, it is also something more. When you are gang stalked, and this was in the beginning of my gang stalking, by 40 to 100 people a day, everywhere you go, and no one you write to, no public official will help, you get angry. I would come home from being gang stalked all day, and the first thing I would do is post videos or snapshots of my experience on Facebook and YouTube. By the way, they threw me off Facebook, not YouTube. That's the most effective way I've found to cope with gang stalking, with the anger you feel about having to go through this every day. I started a website about government gang stalking. My first website was called The Introvert Speaks, which morphed into No Stasi in America, which became Stop Gang Stalking Please, the website I have now. I began informing myself, reading the ACLU website, following closely the comments of Bob Barr, who criticized fusion centers. I read the Bill of Rights Defense Committee's website and the Electronic Frontier Committee's website. I read what politicians like Senator Russ Feingold, loved Russ Feingold, who constantly raised civil liberties issues, were saying. I put the insights I gained early into a book I self-published, Organized Gang Stalking, New Torture Tactic to Neutralize Citizens. Actually, there's a question mark after that. From Senator Russ Feingold, when he was still in office, and the ACLU, I got insights into how government gang stalking probably started. The Attorney General under Bush, Michael Mukasey, changed the guidelines for the FBI, which had been put in place after COINTELPRO, to prevent those kinds of abuses of citizen civil liberties from ever happening again. What he did was effectively suspend anti-COINTELPRO regulations. Senator Kennedy, Russ Feingold, sent Mukasey a letter about their deep concerns about what he was doing. We are concerned, they wrote, about the extent to which such authority might, for example, permit the FBI to conduct long-term physical surveillance of an innocent American citizen. Interview such individual neighbors and professional colleagues, including based on a pretext or misrepresentation, recruit human sources to provide information on that individual, or conduct commercial database searches on that individual, all without any basis for suspicion. Moreover, the mechanisms that the FBI intends to use for approval and oversight of these new investigative tools have not been shared with Congress, and yet are critical to understanding how these tools could be employed. We are particularly concerned, Senator Ted Kennedy and Russ Feingold said, that the draft guidelines might permit an innocent American to be subjected to such intrusive surveillance based in part on race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, or on protected First Amendment activities. Their letter continued, the draft guidelines include broad information sharing provisions with few constraints. While there is no doubt that our intelligence agencies must share important threat information with one another, we have serious questions about the scope of information sharing as it relates to U.S. persons who are under no suspicion of wrongdoing. The ACLU wrote, "We're also working for change in FBI investigative guidelines that represent a serious threat to privacy rights of innocent Americans." The original Attorney General guidelines were adopted in the mid-1970s to limit the FBI's investigative authority after it was discovered that the agency engaged in widespread abuses and violations of constitutional rights, including politically motivated spying on figures like Martin Luther King Jr. In COINTELPRO, many ordinary citizens were targeted too. The ACLU went on, in 2008, then Attorney General Michael Mukasey issued much broader guidelines that allow the FBI agents to use paid informants, monitor a person's activities, or engage in other types of intrusive surveillance without probable cause or any evidence of wrongdoing. One particularly bizarre provision allows the FBI to violate the Attorney General guidelines without approval or notice to the Attorney General. It is hard to overestimate the dangers to personal privacy inherent in creating an ambiguous set of guidelines for invasive surveillance of Americans and then granting the FBI the authority to violate those guidelines unilaterally. Something like government gang stalking went on during World War I, called the American Protective League, a voluntary auxiliary of 250,000 citizen members who worked with the approval of the Justice Department and were involved in the surveillance and harassment of citizens. Attorney General Palmer stopped the program, saying it was based on rumor and hearsay. Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer confirmed something I was thinking when he told Judge Napolitano on his show Freedom Watch, our government was using neurolinguistic programming in its PSYOPs program. Anchoring is a technique of neurolinguistic programming. I know that because in thinking about doing coaching after I retired from teaching, I spent $2,000 on a self-teaching kit in neurolinguistic programming, which is widely used in coaching. Anchoring has been defined as the tendency of any one element of an experience to bring back the entire experience. In government gang stalking, RED, the most frequently used anchor, becomes associated with the experience of being surveilled and harassed by the gang stalkers. The anchor RED reminds that target of the whole aversive experience, triggering a negative emotional state. The goal of the FBI's COINTELPRO program was to neutralize their targets. What they are doing in government gang stalking is the same thing. The health effects of mobbing have been documented by researchers. There is a long list of consequences that Dr. Pamela Lutkin-Sandvik of the University of New Mexico and Sarah J. Tracy and Jess K. Alberts of Arizona State University in their study tell us can result from bullying, mobbing. I'm going to take another drink. The consequences of bullying, mobbing are permanent psychological and occupational impairment, damage to self-esteem, damage to physical health, cognitive function, and emotional health. It can increase the risk of depression and cause prolonged duress disorder, alcohol abuse, post-traumatic stress disorder, and suicide. Chronic stress, high blood pressure, and increased risk for coronary heart disease can also result from bullying, mobbing. The exact kind of consequences you'd want to achieve to neutralize someone. We have a definition of gang stalking. The definition given to a female reporter for the Central Coast News by law enforcement was, gang stalking is when multiple people organized to systematically stalk and harass a person, whether emotionally or physically. We know who is doing government gang stalking. police, firemen, security guards, EMS, ambulance drivers, both public and private, and citizens, most likely from the National Neighborhood Watch Group program, Citizen Corps. We know the tactics they are using. Sleep deprivation. They have gang-stalking neighbors use power equipment, beeping, barking dogs, and hammering to disturb sleep. Social isolation. Getting surrounding neighbors to gang stalk. Getting members of the community to gang stalk. Conspicuous surveillance. Using an American Stasi, most likely neighborhood watch groups, Citizen Corps, members to gang stalk using red cars and trucks, or wearing red, or pushing red strollers, or riding red bikes. Unremitting harassment. Beeping horns when you try to sit in your yard or collect your mail. Using anchors. For instance, porch lights flickering on and off when you go out of your house at night. Same time exit entry. Having gang stalkers past your house or on foot or by car when you leave or enter your house. Having gang stalkers there on your exits and entries in the community. Taking another drink. Noise. They use power equipment, hammering in their program of unremitting harassment throughout the day. Intimidation with dogs. As you walk in the park, they let dogs off their leashes. This goes on wherever you walk. They even have dogs jumping out of a car windows in store malls. Anonymity is what keeps gang stalking going. So many people do it that you can't hold them individually responsible. But when you take a video of your gang stalking, as I do, and publish those video and snapshots of what you are experiencing on Facebook, I did that before they threw me off, and YouTube, and on my website, the anonymity starts to fall away. In the beginning, I would take pictures of the person, even their face. Now, as I have softened through the years, I don't. It's not the individual that is responsible for this. It is our corrupt intelligence agencies, and it is our corrupt government, and I see this as a globalist phenomena that started with the globalist Bush Cheney. All right, I'll continue reading. The whole community starts to look at people with red cars and red trucks and wonders if they are gang stalkers. For the 9 years of my gang stalking, that didn't seem to cause problems for our gang stalking U.S. government. But when the views to my YouTube channel reached over 200,000, at one point they reached over 500,000. But then, as Twitter followers know, what they do in that case is they just take away your followers, the people who view your Twitter things, or in my case, my YouTube account. So I think now today, if you were to look on my YouTube channel, you'd see a few thousand people, a couple of thousand people, where at its highest point, before they started taking away my viewers, it was 500,000. Okay, let's continue. On May 29th, 2015, after 9 years, this was 9 years when I wrote this, of being gang stalked with the anchor red, they switched the primary anchor. In other words, when everybody started to know, they used red, had 500,000 views on my YouTube channel. I began to be gang stalked intermittently using the anchor red, but primarily by people wearing black pants or black shorts or black caps, driving black cars and black trucks, pushing black strollers and riding black bikes. And in July, a third anchor replaced the black. I could go on. It went from black to white. Then they started using green and yellow. They still intermittently today start using green and yellow, but I pay no attention to it because it's just manipulation. These snakes in the grass want to confuse, and so what happens is, because they are narcissists, and narcissists, you can't ask a narcissist to lose. We've seen that from Trump. They go out of their mind. They have to win. And so when I don't pay attention to the alternate colors that they use, and most frequently it's been like green, then they go back to red, because they just have to think that they are effective. They're narcissists after all. I believe that all criminals are narcissists. But anyway, let's get back to what I'm reading. All right, I'm going to skip this part about them using different colors, because that was actually in the beginning, like when I had 500,000 views on YouTube. Then they started using different colors, and they still intermittently do. And especially now that the Republicans are taking over one house of Congress, and they're going to investigate the FBI's role in a presidential election, they started using green, and once in a while they'll use yellow, and I just ignore it because they're narcissists. Now, of course, I'm telling them this, and everything that I say on my website affects things. In other words, if I say on my website they're using power equipment, that power equipment goes off. I mean, that's what they do. Now, of course, I'm telling them that now, so I have no idea what they're going to do in the future. But this is what these a-holes do. All right, let's get back to this, all right? Now, I'll go to the part where I talk about what have I used to put up with this for 13 years. It started in 2006. I'll just tell you, before I start reading the things that I've used through the years, I'll tell you the latest thing that I've used. And the latest thing that I've used is spirituality. And to tell you the truth, I couldn't get along without it. All right, let's go back to what I've used throughout the years. Number one, I have a stress eraser. This is what I said years ago, which is like a biofeedback device. You can get more information about that at stresseraser.com. I use acupressure at times from the book Acupressure for Emotional Healing by Michael, I think you pronounce his name, Gotch, and by Beth Ann Henning. I've used ideas from The Healing Power of Art by Barbara Gannon from Sounds True. Love that program, Healing Power of Art. Love it. The books I read in psychoanalysis and psychology over several years have helped me a lot. Not only have they helped me a lot, I wouldn't have survived this without that. I'm a dominant introvert and intuitive, and so the things I'm most interested in are like religion, spirituality, and in the beginning years of my life was fascinated by psychology, psychoanalysis, and read for years on that topic. And if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be standing. All right, let's read the next thing. The Relaxation CD in the Self-Hypnosis Home Study Course by Stephen Gurkovich is one of my favorite ways to relax. Unfortunately, I don't have the 40 minutes it takes to do it, but that is a great CD. For those who need professional help, okay, I got to flip the page here. Let's stuck to the other page. I'd recommend going to the EMDR International Association website to find a therapist. EMDR is helpful for those suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder or trauma. That's a great program. Can't think of what those letters stand for, EMDR. I used to know once upon a time, but that's like, you know, you can go through years of psychotherapy for post-traumatic stress disorder, or you can use that, and that helps right away. Number 7, to deal with the noise, I have white noise machines throughout my house, which I use for restful sleep. I put them in my brother's room. I have them in my room. Throughout the years, wouldn't have been able to survive without those white noise machines. Government gang stalking is not easy to express in words. Words don't begin to describe how stressful this experience is. But what they might do is to make us ask, what is going on? Is what is going on constitutional? We've seen abuses like this before in COINTELPRO, and it was when the anti-COINTELPRO regulations were rescinded in the Bush administration that the door was opened for what we're seeing today. This is a program of the most evil person you can think of. The most evil person you could think of. Aristotle said, evil is ignorance. This is a person of gross unconsciousness. Gross unconsciousness. And I think when I was reading about how Dick Cheney had his hand, a big hand thumbprint in the surveillance programs under the Bush administration. In my heart and soul, I believe that that man who said of the Iraq War that it was good, even after we knew that tens of thousands of people died in that war, a person that could say that a war in which tens of thousands of people died are innocent people, a person that had their hand on the surveillance programs under the Bush administration, along with other neocons in the administration, is probably responsible for government gang stalking. Deep in my soul, I believe that that man had something to do with this. Only somebody that evil could start a program like this. I wrote above, continuing reading, I wrote above the above story many years ago when some people in Belgium asked me to write down my story to make government gang stalking public. It is not only, obviously, going on in America. From what I've seen on the internet, I believe that it's going on in other NATO countries. Later, I became suspicious that they were insincere, just trying to make me look like a fool. But at least, because of them, I wrote my story. Using different color anchors didn't last long. Eventually, they reverted back to red. Green was the second most frequent anchor used over the years. Yellow was the third most frequent anchor. But it's hard to get as many gang stalkers as have red cars, trucks, strollers, bikes to switch colors. Now that so many people are starting to understand how corrupt our intelligence agencies are, I'm no longer gang stalked by up to 100 or so people a day, as I was in the beginning, the first days of this program. But in the 16, let's see, I say 13, 16, it started in 2006, do the math. Actually, that gang stalker fireman in my neighborhood started earlier than that, a few earlier. He would stalk me in my neighborhood. All right, so here we go. I call the first responders and neighborhood watch group members citizen court who gang stalk our American Stasi. And there was something I read a long time ago that our government actually hired people from the Stasi in Germany and put them on the payroll to get ideas from them. Now, I didn't write it down. Probably if I look in my notes on gang stalking, somewhere among the notes I have that. I know I posted the exact wording of the thing that I read on my website. It might have been on the Introvert Speaks, I don't know. But I do believe, there is no doubt in my mind, the Stasi in East Germany used unremitting harassment. The Stasi in East Germany had a percentage of the population involved in it. Programs like the American Protective League used children. They used children in gang stalking. They used their own children. They dressed them in red. They use teenagers, young people, which is outrageous that you would teach our young people mobbing. This is such a horrific program. You know, when I take pictures, and now I take a few pictures, it's just a sample of what is going on. It would drive you crazy to take pictures of everything they do. This program, I can't express how horrific it is. You can see the people who have undergone it, the effect that it has had on them.